Da 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 da. What's my good cheer? Welcome, everybody. Let's give YouTube a couple of minutes to get those notifications out. And in the meantime, if you've never met me before, hi, I'm Cindy. I explore the inside and the outside. And officially, I can say I explored the outside today. I went for my first good walk in 2 weeks. If you don't know, I've been doing a little bit of recuperating. I overdid it a couple of weeks ago, kind of laid me up, and it offered up so many lessons in that. Uh, like I was saying, and I have been saying, because it was an experience for me. I am grateful for my good health. I normally don't suffer with aches and pains. I've never had a headache. I've never had a bleeding nose. I'm grateful for my good health, especially when there are all kinds of illnesses going on in my family that it's pretty amazing that I have somehow gratefully skipped all that mess. But I got a wake up call. I got a serious wake up call to remind me I'm not 20 anymore, right? I don't have kids. I don't have grandkids. I don't have a husband with gray hair to mirror back to me my actual age. And when you don't have those physical ailments going on, you kind of think you're going to live forever. You think you're invincible, right? And I'm not going to say I needed to be put in my place, but I think in the end, to get the message through my noggin, that's exactly what needed to happen to me. And I overdid it. I went for long walks and I hauled and I piled my backpack and I was going for 6 or 8 mile walks every single day. I did that for a week. And yeah, I was out for the count, like out for the count for a couple of days, pretty much stayed in bed for 2 days, then slowly got up and did some movement, but still was sore. And right at the end of the week, I started feeling a little bit better, but I made the decision that I wasn't going to overdo it for another week. So I went another week and I just kind of piddled around my house as spring was rolling in and I had my window open and I could smell spring, and I really did want to be out there. I did have to go to the grocery store, which is only a couple of blocks away. I did have to go to the grocery store a couple of times. So I'm not going to say I didn't get outside at all, but it wasn't for any serious walks at all. And I kind of miss that. If you've been hanging out with me for any length of time, you know I have a serious connection to Mother Nature, especially when I spend so much time on my own, so much time with myself, to be honest, right? And in walking, I can find that I can let myself go and enjoy the air, enjoy the birds, enjoy the grass and the trees. I actually tree hugged a little bit today, which is the first time in a couple of weeks, too. Like literally well, I'm not going to say literally tree hugged. I put my hands on the trees and I walked into the forest a little bit, walked down to the river. I walked down to the river and stood there, and I had a goose come up, and I chattered with him a little bit, and he just floated in the water right in front of me for like 3 minutes. It was so amazing to have that connection with this goose, right? He wasn't afraid of me in any way, and I felt so bad because I normally, when I go for these walks, I've got my bird seed with me, and I bet you would have just loved to have had some sunflower seeds, right? He would have just loved that. But right, I'll remember for next time. But I was out today and it was so amazing. And as usual, when I go out and about, I bump into people I know, and I bumped into a couple of, well, I bumped into a few people that I know today, but I only had a conversation with a couple of them. And I stood on the sidewalk for like a half an hour talking to one lady. I see her every once in a while. She lives in the same building as I do, but she's very outdoorsy too. And she kind of has a little bit of a mentality like I do. She's a bit of a free bird, a free thinker, and she's very independent and very strong minded in her ideas, but very pleasant lady. And yeah, we had a conversation, and I like having these conversations with people when I find that I have commonalities. And we all can take that time and find commonalities with each other. It's important to be social, but sometimes, right, we have upbringings that make us feel a little bit standoffish, or make people think, or make us think that we don't have anything to offer in a conversation. And we most definitely do. I learned to have conversations through different jobs that I had. I've worked in hospitality and customer service for most of my life. And in having those positions, my income depended on how I got along with people, how well people were enjoying their experience, whether it was in a bar or a lounge or in a restaurant, that my tips depended on it. And I found in having these conversations, and at first, right, it was because, right, making the dollar. That's how I stepped into it. So if you are shy, if you have social issues, right, that you're a little bit standoffish, maybe having these positions as a job, maybe not your career, but as a job, it will help you to open up. For myself, it just didn't start in those hospitality and those customer service jobs. It was actually in high school where I had an English teacher take interest in me because I was able to stand in front of a class and do a presentation. And she thought that because I was so introverted, because I didn't join in school activities and socialize with the other kids, I found that I was a little bit of an outcast in that. But she was quite amazed that, when I was put on the spot, I came through. And that was my own upbringing, not to look the fool, right? And it was also an opportunity to just show people that I wasn't the idiot that they thought I was, that they assumed that I was. But I still preferred just to hang out on my own. Well, in that hypervigilance, I was probably looking out for the spitballs, right? And the mean girls. But my teacher in high school, it was in my senior years, right? I think it was in like grade 11 or something. And she, no, maybe grade 10. And she suggested to me that I should join the drama class, right? That I should take that class as one of my classes. And I took her advice, and I didn't think I would be very good at it. But again, in being put on the spot and not wanting to look the fool, I came through for myself. Or maybe those other parts of me were actors, right? Epigenetically, maybe going back hundreds of years. Maybe I was on the stage doing one of Shakespeare's plays or something. Who knows where it came from, but it got dug up. And I found my voice a little bit in that. And in finding my voice, I was actually able to make friends for the very first time. It's kind of sad that it didn't happen until my senior years in high school. But you know what? It's better late than never. And in building these small relationships, I got to understand that there was something about me that was worthwhile to know. I was worth knowing. I had something to contribute in a conversation. My mother used to send me up north in British Columbia to my aunt's trap line. They had a cabin out in the woods, and when the holidays hit, my mother didn't particularly like to have me around, and I agitated her lots, right? But she would send me away, and I enjoyed it. I loved being out in the woods. I've always loved Mother Nature. But we would go into town every day, and she got me a job at like 12 years old as a waitress in a hotel that she worked at. She was the cook, right? And she got me a waitressing job. And then I got to learn that the tip money that I got was dependent not just in the service that I gave my customers, but how much they liked me, right? My personality and stuff. So it gave me an opportunity in having these kind of jobs for me to learn to become open. And like I said, in the beginning, it was just about making the tip money. In the beginning, that's what it was. But I got to realize how much I enjoyed talking to people, how interesting I thought people were. Hello, Cindy. Oh, no problem. No problem. Oh, no, everything is good, Tammy. Don't ever feel that you have to be in a rush to get here. And if you definitely want a day off, like take that day off. You know the show is going to go on without you. I always appreciate your company when you come into my lives, but yes, definitely make sure that you're not rushing, that you're not putting yourself any kind of stressful situation where you feel like you have to be here, right? And yeah, I'm glad you're here, but yeah, keep that in mind, right? Because there are going to be times when you've got things to do, and you know dates that you want to go out on, or events happening, and you should never feel bad. Guilt is a very terrible thing to hold into the system, right? I grew up with guilt and shame being my steering wheel in life. It was kind of the way that I was brought up. It was a way to make sure that when my parents weren't home, that everything was going to be okay. I was the oldest child, so I would be babysitting my three sisters, and it would be my responsibility that nothing went wrong. And if anything went wrong, right, that would have been on me. So there was probably a little bit of fear in that too. But getting back into this idea that we can find commonalities with anybody, you know, for myself, when people come up and they just want to talk about the weather, isn't it a beautiful day? Right? Lots of people would find that boring, would find that uninteresting. But if you really dug deeper, if you really felt deeper into the person in front of you that has made a comment about the weather, right? Or asking me, "Oh, how are you today?" Right? And everybody says, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's good." And meanwhile, their whole life is falling apart, right? But if you can look into these simple introductions into a conversation, you would recognize that they are an introduction, because a lot of people, they don't know how to start a conversation. They might find you interesting, they might want to have a conversation with you, but they don't know you. They don't know how to begin a conversation. They don't have people that they normally talk to and stuff. So I always take it from there. Somebody comments about the weather, then I will, right? I will say, "Oh, maybe, right? They're a little bit nervous. And usually in the first couple of sentences, I can feel somebody out. And if I feel that I need to take over that conversation until they're settled in and comfortable, because I was that person, right? Like I said, I some of these skills I didn't learn until well into my senior years in high school. I was that person, right? And to be able to get somebody's system calmed down, sometimes it just takes a few minutes to make sure that this person's not a bad guy. This person's not going to hurt me. This person's not going to say something mean. This is usually why we kind of are standoffish, right? That people are just not going to get us. And, and that's a lot to do with our upbringing. Somebody put that into our heads, right? Somebody put that into our heads. And, you know, we have to go back into our lives, right? Lots of times they say, leave the past in the past, just let it go. Don't even think about it, especially when you've had difficult childhoods, right? Where you've got issues right now because of those things that have happened in the past. But because you have this idea, if it's just awful and it's over with and I'm never going back there ever again, and we never get an opportunity to resolve, right? Some of the problems that we bring into our adulthood. For me, I carried all those problems right up until I'm well into my 50s before I woke up to some of these ideas. And then at that point, I went, oh my goodness, whether this is going to be fun, whether this was going to be heartbreaking, because a lot of it is heartbreaking because you don't want to think that the people that you loved the most and the people that you thought loved you might have not felt the same way. And that's something really hard to chew on. But if you can chew on some of that stuff, if you can just accept it for what it is, it's a gift because a lot of that recognition of the problems that you have right now can easily dissolve and right, and you have an opportunity to resolve, right, especially if your parents have been gone for a long time. It's a little bit easier to digest, right, to put yourself in the shoes of that person, that little kid that you were, but do it as the person you are now, as an adult who would better understand what they went through, right? What they went through. For myself, I personally thought my mother was a demon. I really did think that. But you know what? Without putting myself in my mother's or in my shoes, but experiencing my mother as an adult, I wouldn't have understood the difficulties that my mother had, right? And it doesn't make up for what happened. I mean, right? Abuse is abuse. And whether it's verbal, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical, right? It is abuse. And, but in recognizing why it happened, it took that bite out of it a little bit. It took that bite quite a bit. And I was able to look at my mother and actually feel sorry for her because she didn't get to experience me in any way. She had no interest in it. And after a while, I had no interest in showing her the person that I could be because I was just too busy being the person that she expected me to be. And I was just enduring my childhood until I was old enough to step out on my own. But that's a terrible thing to do to ourselves because, like I said, I carried all those problems. I had a lot of problems. I picked up things from my mother. I picked up things from my father. I picked up things from my sisters, right? My experiences in school with the other kids, having my coping mechanisms, even as a small child, right? And having obesity issues. And it wasn't very common in the 60s and 70s, right? Now it's the norm. If you're not overweight, a weight or an obese child, right? It's not a big deal because all the kids are that way. And not only that, that stereotype that it came out in the what early 2000s with the big bumps and stuff, they've made it cool to be a big chick, or what they call a thick chick, right? So it was a little bit different. I remember I was like the only big kid in my high school, right? In the very least, in any one of my classes. And the experience was excruciatingly painful. And again, it shut me down on the inside and it made me an introvert. So that's why I was able to relate with people, that come up and they say hi, right? Isn't the weather nice, And I recognize that might have been something that I would have done because I wouldn't have known how to step into a conversation with somebody I wanted to have a conversation with, right? You know, so in recognizing myself in other people, it made me sensitive to other people's issues. It also made me very hyper vigilant, because I was able to read people very, very, very well, right? And, I tried and I try not to go in and do that, right? Foreshadowing and, right? That sightseeing in somebody's private life because I can do that, right? And what do you call that? That's stereotyping, right? That's stereotyping. But if you let their privacy be their privacy and just get to know them on that baseline where they have that capability, that if you do have that opportunity to be friends, right? You're able to have conversations that might benefit each other, that might help to open up each other to different possibilities and maybe save somebody for being shut down in their lives, right? To be totally shut down in their lives, right? I was so hyper vigilant. I do still have that hypervigilance. We were talking a little bit the other day about resentment and trust, and my recognizing that I do have trust issues, right? Because, those relationships that were the most important to me to come to realize that, right, that relationship they were having with me was not as important in this moment. I can accept that, but at the same time it makes me hyper vigilant because I'm reading people to see if they're actually interested, or like when I first started waitressing, right, and bartending, where my tips depended on it, that I was actually getting close to somebody, right? And not actually taking an interest in them. That took time for me. And I learned to appreciate different people. And you guys hear me say it all the time. It takes all kinds to make the world because everybody is unique. And that's one thing in that process of having all those jobs in hospitality and customer service. You recognize pretty fast that everybody's unique. everybody's different. Everybody has different experiences. And a lot of those experiences and hobbies and interests that I have, they were introduced to me by other people who had those interests in their life. And then when I tried them out, I just loved them, right? And it opened myself up to even being more open to have experiences. For me, I love experiences. I've even come to appreciate. I'm not right. I'm not saying more, please. I'm not saying that. But I've come to appreciate the difficult experiences too because I learn from those, right? I really learn from those. And not only do I learn from those, some of those new ideas, those new perspectives and beliefs that I have, I get to practice my craft, right? I get to practice my craft in being able to connect with other people. And it's just easier and easier and easier all the time and more enjoyable all the time. It's very important for us to socialize. It's a one good thing about social media. And I know lots of people that hide behind a thumbnail, right? They're just in the comments and stuff. But if you can get people to open up, right? Like me and Tammy have never met. I love Tammy to death. She's here with me almost every single night. I think she has been since she started hanging out with me. She's been here. She hasn't missed a day yet. And like I said, if you feel you need a day off, you go ahead and you take that day off. I know I always try to make this my time and for me and to enjoy my time with you in the live chat. Oh, really? You couldn't have said a sweeter thing there, Tammy, right? That's your time hanging out with me. That's amazing that you think that way, especially when some of the topics that we talk about are heavy, right? But it's in my intent and in sharing who I am and in that honesty, right? Because the one thing I learned in this process is, not everybody is kind. Not everybody is rooting you on, right? And I found that if I'm honest and genuine in who I am and somebody gets to know me, if they know those things that bother me, those small hurts in my life or the big hurts in my life, and they use that against me, even in those coercive ways, just in letting something slip kind of casually into a conversation or something, I will catch that. And that says more than anything, right? Because lots of times people are like this and they keep it in their head. But if they've got something that they think can be a weapon about against me, right? And they use that against me, that will say everything to me. And it's something to recognize that it's very helpful. It's why I love telling the truth. When I come in, I could just go into that flow and I could just talk about absolutely everything or anything. And I'm not back checking. I'm not, right, checking off to make sure that I'm saying everything perfectly. I'm not going, "Ooh, is this what I said tomorrow? And now we're talking about the same thing. And this is what I'm talking about now." And then have these things cross checked and see that there's a discrepancy in that, right? And so the beautiful thing I like about my channel myself, and I think it would be important for me in in the content creators that I follow, that they're doing the same thing, right? That there is no lying, right? There is no double checking. There is no opportunity for somebody say liar, right? Maybe they would say liar if they didn't agree with what I'm saying, but that doesn't mean that it's not a truth for me. And if we had this same conversation a year from now, right, I would be able to say the exact same thing. Now, there is a little bit of a difference here is if my perspectives change, right? That something in my life has been course corrected. That, one way that I'm thinking last year is something I'm totally thinking about differently this year. But for me, that would be an opportunity to course correct with my audience. And it would also be a lesson in being willing to be course corrected because we're all brought up with ideas. We're all brought up with ideas, but none of them are our ideas. None of them. There are parents' ideas, there are teachers' ideas. Sometimes, because we don't know, we'll pick up the ideas from our siblings, right? And we'll take them on as our own. And then we grow up and, right, we're not ourselves. We are something that was created in the past. And a lot of what I do is in course correcting. A lot of what I do is in course correcting. Oh my goodness. And I've been at this for a long time. Like I said, I've been on YouTube. It'll be 12 years this December, right? 12 years on YouTube. And all throughout that time, it has been a learning process for me. And I have changed so many times, right? Pivoted so many times, but change is not something I'm adverse from, right? Throughout my life, change has come at me consistently. Like I said, 11 different elementary schools. That's almost two two schools a year all through elementary schools. That's a lot. That's traumatic. And whether somebody thinks it is or it isn't, I always try to look at it like, oh, they didn't like me in this school. What can I change? And going to this school, what can I change about myself? And I would be like a chameleon, just tearing off my clothes and then putting on a totally different suit in order to suit my surroundings. And I never had an idea of who I truly was, right? I never, not once in my life did I ever have an opportunity to be truly who I was, except for when I was by myself. And I think probably in this moment, I'm just recognizing that's why I really love being by myself because I don't have to represent myself as anything than what I am. Especially, even like I said today, I bumped into a few people. I've lived here in Winnipeg now since 1980. My family moved here to Winnipeg, and I moved along with them because I was fresh out of high school. I just got booted out of the house. I was moving in with my friend, and then my dad comes home and goes, "Okay, we're moving to Winnipeg." And I'm just like, I have these plans to move in with my friends, but all my family is moving to Winnipeg. Like, what's up with that? And so I wasn't ready to separate from my family, especially my father when he had congenital heart failure, right? We weren't waiting for him to die, but we were expecting him to die. Right? My entire life I was expecting my dad to die soon, and I wasn't I didn't have any intent of leaving my dad's side until that happened. And I remember asking my dad to ask my mother if I could come with them to Winnipeg. I don't really know why we came to Winnipeg. When my dad made a decision, we were just gone. I think within a couple of weeks we were out of that house, right? Maybe you lost the house in a poker game. Who's to say, right? But we moved to Winnipeg, and I moved back to Vancouver for about 6 months. But then I came right back, and I've been living in Winnipeg ever since 1981. I have been here in Winnipeg, and I love this province. It was home, and if I wasn't open up when I came here to Winnipeg sure opened me up, because that was the one thing about the people of this province. They are so, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-judgmental. That's exactly what it was. Non-judgmental. And, I really grew in the span of my young adulthood. And yeah, I that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. And I think to this day, I'm grateful for that, because again, I wouldn't have had that relationships that I have with my sisters right now if I had stayed in British Columbia. Right? I would have been probably all by myself, right? And I wouldn't have had all those amazing jobs in the bars and in the nightclubs. I really liked working in the bars and in the nightclubs, specifically because it was just so much fun. So I'd work all week at the bar. It was just like going to have fun, and I would make lots of money, and then I would have my days off, and my days off were just for me, right? They were just for me, and I could do whatever I wanted because I had the money. I had my time on my own. I had my own apartment. Oh my goodness. It was the best move ever. And again, it just opened me up even more. But that's what change offers up to you, because you have to adapt. Because when you have to change and pivot in your life, your surroundings are not going to bend for you. You have to bend to the new, right? You have to adjust to the new. And that's what I did. And every time I adjust to the new, I became new. I became different. And maybe in this moment, I do have a little bit of that chameleon in me, right? But that's out of respect to my environment. That's out of respect to the groups that I'm sitting in, because I believe it takes all kinds to make the world. I can fit in with all kinds, right? I can relate to all different ages. I know people in all different age brackets, and I can get along with any of them and enjoy the company. And like I said, I've lived in Winnipeg now for 1980, almost 40 years now I've lived here in Winnipeg. That's a long time. I did move to Edmonton with my husband when he joined the 1st Battalion. I did move there for a year or so. He got us the beautiful house and everything, and I just loved it out there. But that's when our marriage fell apart and everything, right? So I ended up coming back to Winnipeg. But what was I going to say about that? About being able to be open to change. Can't remember. It was going to lead into a conversation. It might come back to me as we go on. I love that when people are non-judgmental. I was born and grew up in judgmental environments, and even though a lot of my adult life too, and I wasn't judging, it was all the others around me. Yeah, that's a toughie, because when I was living in Vancouver, when I grew up, I know what you're talking about. 100%, Tammy, beyond 100%. But when I came to Manitoba, I don't know. I tried to reason about it a little bit in my head because it's curious because I have lived in other provinces and all the provinces offer something beautiful but different. But here in Manitoba, I was thinking that it was probably the extremes in the weather because it gets so cold, like dangerously cold in the wintertime, and it gets dangerously hot in the summertime, right? So I thought maybe it was those extreme weather environments that made it so that we were so dependent on each other for survival. And this is the way I thought. You know, when you depend on people for your survival, then of course you want to be on their good side, right? But the one thing I did notice is that the diversity in this province is absolutely amazing, right? And you know, I come from British Columbia. I didn't grow up. I grew up with lots of Chinese. There's lots of Chinese in British Columbia. But when I came to Manitoba and got introduced to the indigenous, and I thought they were beautiful people, right? Thought they drank too much, right? I didn't drink very much at all. Not to say that I didn't have those days when I did get drunk, but it wasn't my thing. Drinking has never been my thing. And I thought that very odd too, especially to be working in bars and nightclubs. Maybe it was the idea of seeing all the drunk people be silly and stuff that made it so that I didn't want to be not in control of myself. It was probably what it was, that I didn't want to be out of control, or because I was a VLT addict, a video lottery terminal addict. I liked the gambling. That it was probably too expensive, and that was money I could put into the machines, and that probably contributed to it too. But I really appreciated the fun and the kindness because the indigenous were so kind to me. They were so funny, like, you know, to have conversations, and they were so much fun when you went to house parties and stuff like this. Like, I really liked them. Uh, One thing I'm going to have to say right now, because it just popped into my mind, was the fact that I'm really appreciating the examples out there in the indigenous community that they post. I'm 365 days sober, because alcoholism is something that's very prevalent in the indigenous communities, and it has hurt their standing in the province 100%, right? And you know, there are members of that community that are quitting drinking, like a lot of them, and they post their successes. They post, "Oh, I'm 3 years, sir. I'm 3 years sober, and you know, I've got my life together, and I've got a good job, and I'm working in my community, and I'm a spiritual leader, and you know, I'm a chief in my community." And I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying we have to be the examples for others. Like, we have to be the examples for others because, oh my goodness, they're doing such a good job. And so many people are actually quitting drinking, right? Now I don't know what the drug situation. I don't really see it in that community. I'm sure it's there, but I don't see it. But I do see the drinking, right? I do see the drinking part of it, especially when I live across the street from a what do you call that? It's a home where people, when they come up from up north, and they come and they have to do hospital operations and stuff. So these are like apartments where they can stay and recoup and do their post-op appointments and stuff. And I see them out there all the time, and they're drinking and stuff. So I know it's still a big problem, but when you have leaders out there, and this is what these people are, the people who have quit drinking, and they have that courage and that bravery to come online and do their Instagram posts or their TikTok posts, and the pride that they have in themselves. It makes me have pride because this is my community too. This is my province, right? And these were my friends when I had younger years. Well, I'm not going to say younger years because I still have a couple of friends, right, that are indigenous. They don't drink either, but that's not my community. So of course we surround ourselves with people that are like-minded, right? But that wouldn't stop me from having that moment of chameleon, just to be that person that would be able to have an interesting conversation with somebody and maybe lead somebody to see the example in me of what they could possibly do for themselves in their life, just like their own community is doing online. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that they're doing such a good job. Like, that's what we need. We need to be the example for each other. We really do. And that's how this world's going to get a little bit better. We just need a few more people out there doing their thing, being the examples for others. And yeah, we're going to see some amazing things going on. It's one of the things about this digital age, this age, and where we've got social media where we can actually connect, even if we're not social people, that we can have a voice, right? Even if nobody sees who you are, even if they're just popping into that video for the first time, that you can say something positive or say something inspiring to somebody, or you could tell a story that will make you the example for others too, in a good way. That's absolutely amazing, and that's a good way for people who are a little bit shy, a little bit introverted, right? People who just kind of hang out on their own because they don't feel like they have anything to contribute. They know they have something to contribute. They just don't know how to contribute it, right? Sometimes it's just doing the baby steps, just putting one foot in front of another, right? Right? Taking an interest in the person in front of you. But yeah, that's one thing I do appreciate about this province that I do live in, is that they are, everybody is non-judgmental, right? Right? Like, so many different cultures. We really encourage immigration here. We have every nationality going on under the sun here in Manitoba. But I would think most provinces and states are getting to that point, right? And that helps in becoming more tolerant, right, of others. And that's sometimes where it starts, is just tolerance, and then it moves to acceptance, and then it moves to that openness and that willingness to connect with people that are different from us. It's only in our mindset that we become stubborn and judgmental and closed off to others because, again, right, we were brought up that way, and we get to dictate, right, what the next step forward in our evolution is going to look like. And I think we're off to a pretty good start. Sometimes we do have to make a mess to clean a mess, and that's a truth. And you can see that the world is pretty messy right now, but I think, right, we're going to come out of it. Right? We're going to come out of it, like some great movement today with President Trump, right? He got China to promise that they're not going to give any weaponry to Iran. And Trump says he promises to keep the strait open so that the oil can keep flowing, right? And yeah, you have to make deals in that, but that's how you build treaties, right? That's how we make agreements. This is how the Constitution. I'm not an American, but I'm assuming it was a whole bunch of ideas coming to the table and them going through it and rehashing what is the most important ones, and then taking a vote and deciding by majority what we're going to be in the Constitution, right? And I believe in majority. I really do, because I believe the minority will hold the majority accountable in the end, right? And sometimes we are so split up in our ideas that it does take a majority to get something pushed through, right? Unless you're President Trump, right? Who thinks you're king of the world. And then, but if you can manage to get it done, right? The idea is just get it done. Get that mess thrown all over the floor so that we can just clean it all up and make it better than ever, right? Sometimes you gotta make a mess to clean a mess. Okay, I love diversity. I love different cultures and people and having friends who are from different cultures too. 100%. You know, one thing I notice about myself is because I have an interest in different religions and spirituality and you know, different ideas in culture and stuff, that it makes it really neat that I can find commonality with people outside of how I was brought up, right? Because, I never thought, because I don't say bad things in any way about any kind of religion out there or any kind of spiritual idea out there. I have my own. It's not my place, right? I try not to voice my ideas on that in my brand, right? Because I just work in mindset. The idea is that we're all getting along, right? But I find it so curious that people who have total different ideas about how the world works than I do, and we find each other fascinating, and we are connecting in really beautiful, beautiful ways, and it surprises me. And not only does it surprise me, especially in the Christian religion, because my mother was a Christian. She loved Jesus. She didn't quite know what denomination she was, but she loved Jesus, right? And in my life, I'd always felt that, because when I was crying out for help, God never rained down on me and come and save me, right, from the moment that I was having, that I thought I had a little bit of resentment towards Christianity. And then to be able to make friends who are devout Christians, like, I don't have many friends, but one of my friends, she's a devout Christian. Her whole family is, and they're absolutely beautiful. And they love me to death, all of them. They love me to death, even knowing the person that I am. And I think it's absolutely just beautiful, right? And that's an example for others. We shouldn't be warring with each other because of religions or political ideas. And we do both, don't we? Right? Or cultural ideas. Familial ideas, I think we could do a little bit better by having more commonalities in that, because, right, we don't get much choice in who brings us up as children. So if there's a little bit of accountability in that, then parents won't misstep in that, because those are very important years, especially up to like 7, 8 years old. It's very important that those children grow up with good, good values and be able to expect those values to be followed by everybody, do as I say, not as I do, right? There was a lot of that going on in my family. Okay, you guys, let's grab a card and we're just going to go into it for a couple of minutes. Maybe it will be pertinent to the conversation, maybe it won't. It was an amazing day today. I had a beautiful, nice long walk, walking through mud puddles, stopping and having conversation. Went and got a cup of coffee. Oh my goodness, I haven't had a donut shop coffee in like 2 weeks. It was absolutely amazing in actuality. And then I took a different route home and I walked down to the river and I got myself, there was a little library. Well, it's not a little library, it's an open library. It's a little a hut. It's a hut and it's all full of bookshelves and it's in between a whole bunch of big high-rise apartment buildings. And so when people finish their books, they put the books in this little building and you walk right into the building and it's all made of red plexiglass, so it's nice and bright in there. And I stood there for like 15 minutes looking at all the books and then I picked myself up a book. And I've never heard of this lady, but this looks like one of a book of series. And so I'm going to read this one. And if I enjoy it, then I'm going to read her other books. I do pick up books on occasions. I have a little bookshelf behind me. And I browse through, especially, like the history books and the crystal books, right? I like to collect crystals. Uh, but the novels, I really have hard time delving into the novels because I'm so busy in the thought leadership. And actually, because of my hypervigilance, I want to feel out who I'm learning from because we also know that out there are a lot of thought leaders that are all mouth and no action, right? But yeah, so I read a few of the books and this one looked like it was really going to be quite interesting and down my alley. So I decided that was going to be a book and I think I'm going to start that book tomorrow. Maybe at very least dedicate 1 hour in the morning with my morning coffee. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to read maybe a chapter or two. And then I'm going to, if I get into it, sometimes I get, if it's interesting, I'll read the book in a day or two. I will, maybe not a day, but in 2 days, right? I will take it in. And I'm being distracted by the yelling outside. They're they're fighting. Yeah. But you guys, let's grab a card. We'll go into it for a couple of minutes and then I'm going to call it a night. I'm right in the middle. I've been watching RV videos, tour videos of different RVs, and then I'm doing price comparisons and stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, Cindy, what are you doing? Like, these RVs are like over $100,000. Why are you watching this? But you never know, right? A circumstance could change on a dime, and I could be looking at these and what you think about is realized. Right? And I don't know if you believe that, Tammy. What you think about is realized. It's how I do my trips in September. I'm on it, right? And I'm thinking of my retirement and how amazing it would be for an RV. So I watch these tours of these different RVs on the market, and they're absolutely amazing. Oh my goodness. Some of them, I write them down. I have a little list here of my favorite ones so that, when and if that opportunity, right? Because we have our RV shows here in Manitoba too. So next RV show, it won't be until wintertime. I'm going to be on it. I'm going to go to the next RV show and just take a really good gander at these RVs, unless I get a job at an RV sales lot, right? But I think might be too late in the season now because they're probably up and running and hired their staff already, right? Something to think about in any case. But yeah, right now I'm watching a metal detecting video. Hoover Boys is one of my favorites. Well, yeah, I watch them. They're only once a week, right? My favorite actually is Stealth Diggers and not Thursdays. It's the same gentleman, but one is with his buddies and the other one is him out in the bush just searching for old home sites so that, he can go back and tell his buddies, I found one. And then they got a new episode for next week, right? Yeah, so I really like them. Okay, you guys. Oh, and I found out, right? Because I wasn't quite sure where he's from, but he's from New Hampshire. New Hampshire, right? On the East Coast. Yeah. I thought he was down south somewheres, but he's not. He's actually in northern United States. Okay. Here is what were we talking about, Tammy? Right? Acceptance. And even though it underneath it says something a little bit different, I was thinking of that conversation. The first thing that came to my mind is that, right, having that acceptance for people who are different than us, right? It takes, because that was what we were talking about, it takes all kinds to make the world, and how important it is to be non judgmental. Because if we can be non judgmental, we can open up our whole lives. We can meet people that possibly we were supposed to be hanging out with, but yet we're hanging out with a crew over here, and who knows how we hooked up with them, but we've been with them for 20 years. And then all of a sudden, if we're not judgmental and we get to meet somebody else and have a new experience, right? Okay, acceptance. Acceptance is understanding we don't have all the answers, right? We don't have all the answers, but in tying into these conversations of understanding that it takes all kinds to make the world, and if we can find a way to connect with people who are different than us, that think different than us, that might even be from a different culture or a different religion or a different political idea, and we can find a way to connect, right? To find one commonality with somebody else, we might be able to learn something new. We might be able to expand on an idea that we have, or better yet, we can totally change our perspectives, right? As long as we're willing, the ideas that we're just familiar with, right? We like familiarity, don't we? We like the things that are the same as what we are. But the idea is, if we can expand, right? If we can be open minded and willing, we can be a little bit different too. And maybe, right? We can connect with others. And sometimes that's all we need, because we've been hanging out with the same crew our entire life. And possibly that wasn't our crew ever, right? But we didn't give ourselves a chance to recognize that, right? Acceptance is understanding we don't have all the answers. But we live in this digital age right now. It's an opportunity to connect. Why? Because we're all this close now. We're all this close. Okay, you guys. That's my good cheer. Thank you, everybody, for coming in to my live show tonight. You like metal detecting too? Oh my goodness. Check out Stealth Diggers. Stealth Diggers, and not Thursday. It's the same gentleman, but he has two channels. Okay, you guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great night.